Record. Welcome, everybody. Wapiti Wednesday live Q&A for Wednesday, April 9th. First little bit of news, a tidbit is the giveaway is live. So, if you guys don't remember, all you got to do is go to Sheep Feet Outdoors, buy a pair of socks, use code ECA425. You get 10% off of your purchase. And for every pair of socks, you get entered into the giveaway. So, okay. And by the way, my custom orthotics, today was the first day on the custom orthotics from Sheep Feet. Yeah, they're pretty cool. So, all right, on to more important topics and the reason we are gathered here today. So, as I mentioned, nobody responded with any topics until we actually came on here. So now we know that, in fact, I better write that down. Wallows. Okay, there. Now we have the topic written down. So tonight we are going to go through the subspecies of North American elk. So, did ask kind of roughly if there was any guesses, and since Jason just joined the room, we're going to throw him right onto the hot seat. Jason, how many subspecies of elk are there in North America?
Three. Total guess.
Total guess, you're halfway there. There's six. I won't ask anybody what they are. We'll just do
Okay.
this. We'll make it easy on you guys. So, all right. Can everybody see the wonderful document and sheet?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Yes.
The six recognized subspecies in North American history are the Roosevelt elk, which is also called the Pacific or coastal, the Rocky Mountain elk, the Tule elk, the Manitoban elk, and then there used to be the Merriam elk and the Eastern elk. Now, the Merriam and Eastern are both extinct. Now, here's the question. Any turkey hunters?
I was going to say something about that if it was the Merriam, like Florida turkey.
So, because within turkeys, you have the Eastern, the Merriam, the Rio, and the Osceola. The Osceola is
Florida.
Florida. But yes, there was a Merriam. There is a Merriam and there is an Eastern turkey, just like there used to be a Merriam and an Eastern elk. So, all right. So, first up, the Roosevelt elk. So, the Roosevelt, kind of the range is the Pacific Northwest coastal regions. And they can actually stretch anywhere from Northern California all the way up into British Columbia. So they do have a pretty good range that they cover, but they are specifically in those coastal range mountains. So there is a huge difference between the Roosevelt and the Rocky Mountain, which is on, see, Oregon and Washington, you've got Roosevelt's on the west side coastal, but you've got Rocky Mountains on the east side. California, you've got the Roosevelt's in the coastal range, but you also have another subspecies that we'll talk about. So now, the one thing about the Roosevelt elk is the Roosevelt is the largest body-wise subspecies. So, Roosevelt bulls, you could be looking easily at 1,000 pounds on the hoof. Their body-wise, they are huge. Their antler configurations are quite a bit smaller than the Rocky Mountain. So the other thing too is darker coloration compared to subspecies, probably because more so of the habitat that they live in, that dense rainforest coastal mountain type. And they're slightly their antler formation is different because it's smaller antlered, but also too they get a lot more palmation. They get kind of some weird oddities. So they definitely adapted to rainforest environments and they can tolerate a high rainfall amount. I don't know if you guys have ever been into the coastal mountains of Oregon or Washington, but it is wet and lots of blueberries and blackberries, lots of blackberries. So, which means you also have lots of blackberry bushes. So, stable populations in Olympic National Park and coastal regions. So, all right, next up, the one that most of us know about are the Rocky Mountain. So now the Rocky Mountain region, basically from New Mexico all the way up to Alberta, they are the mostly widely distributed subspecies. So coat-wise, they are lighter than a Roosevelt. Roosevelt have a lot of reddish tint to it, where our Rocky Mountains kind of get that tan body. So in fact, that's where some of the discussion with the term Wapiti comes from, was basically a Native American term with tan bodied. So larger antlers with more points. So Rocky Mountain record book, to make permanent book on the Rocky Mountain elk side, it's 285. I think permanent book on the Roosevelt side is 235. So quite a bit different on that. So, what's kind of interesting is it came up with distinctive bugling during rut under the Rocky Mountain. But honestly, I think out of all of them, I think Tule elk have the most distinctive bugle. If you've ever heard the different species bugle, Tule elk have quite a bit higher pitched than any of the others. So, all right, habitat of the Rocky Mountain. It's pretty adapted to various elevations and habitats. They can be from mountains to foothills. Rocky Mountain are very adaptable to sagebrush flats all the way up to above tree line. So they're completely comfortable. They can adapt to all the different situations or all the different terrains. Biggest thing is they need the most, just like anything else, they need that food, water, cover to survive. So conservation status of the Rocky Mountain is they are the most numerous subspecies and also subject of many successful reintroduction efforts. Kentucky, Pennsylvania, a lot of the elk that are being reintroduced on the east side come from the Rocky Mountain subspecies.
Would Roosevelt elk survive in the Rockies? Or do they need that moisture?
I don't see why they couldn't. It's just they haven't, they would struggle just because the coastal range doesn't really get the snow like you do once you start heading towards the Rockies. So
Right.
they may not have the survival skills, impregnated within them to know what to do with the snows, to know to get down to lower elevations. And I mean, that's the thing with, I've had a couple of students from Washington and Oregon that hunt the coastal range. And it's kind of funny because, talking to them and they're like, yeah, we hit this mountain and hey, can we look at it on Onyx because I want your take on it. And I'm like, yeah. And I pull it up and I'm like, okay, where's the mountain that you're talking about? And it's like, oh, it's right there. Do you not see it? And I'm like, well, I see a hill that goes up to like 900 feet in elevation. So, and they're like, yeah, that's the mountain that we're hunting. And
Oh,
I'm
good.
like, okay, I got to remember that you're starting at 0 going to 900 because here I'm thinking of areas that I'm hunting that are 9,500 feet to 10,000 feet. And I'm like, oops, I just, okay, let's not make a mountain out of this molehill. No dad joke or pun intended there. So, but anyways, but yeah, Greg, it might take a few generations to get the survival. So, okay. Next up is Tule. So, Tule to me are one of the most fascinating of all the species. I just because they're limited to California's Central Valley and part of the coastal range. That is the only place Tule elk are, and they are the smallest North American subspecies body wise and antler wise. So at least with Rocky Mountain and Roosevelt's, you get a trade-off. You know, one larger body, smaller antler, the other a little smaller body, larger antlered. But with Tule, nope, Tule is the little brother. They got the smallest body size and the smallest antler. But their coloration looks really, really close to Rocky Mountains. So they just look like a smaller version of the Rocky Mountain elk. So um, there's not a whole lot of them left. So right now they're saying there's about 5,700 individual elk due to conservation. They were actually down to a single breeding pair in the late 1800s. So to go from just that breeding pair back to 5,700, there are active hunts within California, but to obviously with only 5,700, they don't have, you know, a lot of tags. You see too, their habitat preference is adapted to drier, you know, grassland type habitats. But if you think of that central California, I mean, that's that rolling yellow grass, not a whole lot of trees, vegetation, you know, to really go. That's the environment that they live in. So obviously, water is a huge important feature of theirs. So, okay. Now, Manitoban. This is probably one that not a lot of people have heard about. Any of you guys heard of Manitoban?
Mm,
No. Well, that's
no,
because they're central Canada through Minnesota and North Dakota. So they're they're kind of in those areas. So um, they're in an intermediate size between Rocky Mountain and Roosevelt. So, you know, their body size is going to fall right in between those two. I couldn't really find a whole lot of information, you know, on the antler patterns. To me, it kind of falls in the same line. Um, Coloration on it, it's just gonna just like with Rocky Mountain or anything else, depending on what they're rubbing on, that's gonna determine, you know, the color of the antlers, whether you got reds or greens or browns, you know, just depending, or blacks. So they've adapted to that kind of northern forest and prairie transition zone. So this is one of those group of elk that kind of prefer the prairie, but they will go into the northern forest a little bit, but they don't go real high on the forest. So, um, you know, they're also the less studied of all the other subspecies just because the range that they live in is not really kind of the elk mecca or the elk capital that a lot of people think of. So, all right, let's just kind of talk about the two extinct just because the Merriam's going to hit home for Jim here.
yeah.
So, the Merriam elk used to range in the Southwest. They were basically focused in Arizona and New Mexico. They were last killed out in 1906, and you know, no conservation specimens ever preserved. So, there's really not a whole lot known about the Merriams. It's just kind of early settlers just really put the hurting on them and just wiped them out. So, Eastern used to be primarily on the eastern part of North America, which is where a lot of the transplanted Rocky Mountain elk are now thriving over on that side and doing exceptionally well. So The eastern elk actually, they were declared extinct in 1880, and the last known was shot in Pennsylvania in 1877. And I did add the note here that that the modern eastern elk are actually reintroduced Rocky Mountain elk, but the Rocky Mountain elk that have been introduced within those eastern states are thriving exceptionally well. And I think some of you guys have heard me say it before. I really think the next world record is going to come out of Kentucky.
Hmm.
Reason being, mild winters, lots of old mining that has churned up a lot of nutrients into the soils, which then, translates into the grasses. Not a lot of predators, so they have a lot of they really have a recipe for huge growth and huge success within that Kentucky area. So, all right, modern conservation and management. We were just kind of talking about Rocky Mountain elk used to repopulate former eastern elk ranges. They actually did genetic considerations when choosing source populations. So it's not like the scientist basically just sat there and said, "Oh, we're just going to go grab any Rocky Mountain elk," or "Oh, we're just going to go grab any Roosevelt." When they did choose the species, they actually narrowed it down even more. Of what they tried to do was, obviously, they wouldn't want to take elk from Arizona, New Mexico, which is more of an arid, drier climate, and transport them to the east part, which can be more of rainy type environment. So they really did careful considerations to try to match as similar type of weather patterns as they could to pull the elk population from to where they were going to relocate to. So, okay. Some of the current challenges that affect work is habitat fragmentation. You have a lot of urban sprawl going on. Chronic wasting disease is something that is really popping up quite a bit. And of course, human wildlife conflict, just because of the suburban areas growing, and there's just more people out there. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, there is the useless information of the 6 different subspecies of elk that now you guys can go dazzle your friends and go, "Hey, did you know that there are 6 subspecies of elk?" And of course, a lot of them will go, there's only 4. And you'll be like, "Oh, that's right. You're forgetting about the Eastern and the Merriam that were extinct, late 1800s, early 1900s." So yeah, it's easy to forget about those. And they'll be like, "Holy crap, you're really smart." And it's like, "No, I'm in this Wapiti Wednesday live Q&A. You guys really need to join."
Yeah.
I pulled up images of the Manitoban elk. They'd look almost identical to just Rocky Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're fairly close to the same region. I mean, because you're talking about Rocky Mountain that primarily was in the Rocky Mountain ranges, and your Manitoban, which are North Dakota, Minnesota on up through. Really, that's not too far from the Rocky Mountains. Wow,
I hunted Rockies in South Dakota.
You hunted Rockies in South Dakota,
Yeah.
but see, these are Manitoban elk because they're in North Dakota, eh? Not South Dakota.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're damn close.
Yeah.
You think
Yes.
it'd be big up there, geez, because they're so far north,
Yeah.
And
See that we start talking about Canada, eh? And we all just
yeah,
start getting
Canada.
the northern accent. So yeah, perfect. This is why we don't have any Canadians in here, Jim, because of people like you.
Yeah, who started it?
Yeah, I know. I started it because of North Dakota.
Yeah.
So yeah, had nothing to do with Canada.
Okay. Sorry.
So
Will the Rosies and Rockies interbreed?
So, they can. So, and here's the thing with crossbreeds. They usually don't survive because typically, I mean, elk would be a little bit different. Um, but they still have different patterns. I mean, Roosevelts live in very, very thick vegetation. They're used to just rooting in and sitting still, and where, Rocky Mountain, they're using their nose and their eyes to cover distance and go. And it was interesting, and I kind of figured this question was going to come up, but I remembered listening to Dr. Valerius Geist once that he was talking about um, mule tails, cross between mule deer and whitetail. So, because he was talking about how whitetails are typically more aggressive than mule deer, and the whitetail bucks will come in and push the mule deer bucks out, and then they end up breeding with the mule deer does, which they do produce an offspring, but those offspring typically don't survive because a mule deer and a whitetail has different survival instincts and reactions. And so when you end up with a crossbreed like that, it doesn't know what to do in danger. It doesn't know to bound off or run off, or so that's why, he was talking about that those crossbreeds, you never see one get really big and mature just because they don't survive that long. So Sandy, I would think the same thing would happen here because the environment that the Rockies live in versus the environment that the Roosevelt, it really is two different worlds as far as vegetation and food and water and survival instincts. So, but yeah, anything's possible. Any other questions?
Was there an archery shoot last weekend? I
I don't know.
thought they had one at the range here in Eagle. I didn't know they had a range here in Eagle.
I don't know if they had a shoot at the range. I think the Desert Challenge, which was out on 95, happened. And yes, the range there in Eagle, Greg, there's a static range. There's actually two 3D ranges. There was supposed to be a whole It was supposed to be a whole big range with pistol, shotgun, rifle, air rifles, all the way to the back that was going to be military compound.
I'll have to go see if I can find I received like an email or some kind of advertisement on the computer about it, and the map they had was on the very north end of Eagle Road.
It is. You just take Eagle Road and straight out. I was actually supposed to be part of that project to build the whole thing. I was going to build all the vertical structures on it, but then the mayor changed in Eagle and priorities of where funding was actually going to go to. So originally they were just going to put the road and the gate in, but then they went ahead and proceeded and put the static range for the archery and also the two 3D courses. But I was actually starting to talk to archery clubs in the valley to get their input on the 3D ranges when basically I was kind of pushed out of the project, and kind of sounds like that the 3D ranges didn't get put together very well. That kind of a little sketchy. So
The one out off 21 burnt last year, didn't it?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, but they're working on getting that one back. So
yeah. Okay.
okay, did anybody pull up any images of Tule elk?
I pulled up the habitat
It's
maps.
it's dry
Yeah.
yellow grass with oak brush, basically. Scrub oak. Yeah. It's not beautiful scenery. That's for sure, but
Right. Images. Yeah.
Michael, would you say there's any major technique difference in hunting the Rosies versus Rockies?
So Rosies, because they live in such thick areas, such thick terrain, you can't really move around as much like you do with the Rocky Mountain. With Rocky Mountain, you can actually cover ground. With the Rosies, you got to be more patient and actually work areas because your chances of actually bumping them are a lot higher because it is pretty thick. The other thing with the Rosies too is you got to be in close and tight with them because of the vegetation. It's kind of one of those things where hunting Roosevelt or hunting Rockies, you can sit there and go, okay, I'm gonna get you know so far from this guy, and I'm gonna be able to call him over you know 200 yards, 250 yards into my shooting range. Well, you get in with Roosevelts, and some of your spots on Roosevelts, you're lucky if you call them over 75 yards to be able to get into a 10-yard shooting window. So yeah, definitely a lot more patience, working areas more, and really, really understanding the area that you're hunting. Um, because you get into some of that stuff and it gets so stinking thick that you can get turned around pretty easy. So understanding where everything is, good access points, how to get in, how to get out, and how to be safe is the biggest things with that.
Yeah, I knew a older gentleman. Well, he'd been in his 90s by now if he hadn't passed, probably. He's telling me he used to hunt the Rosies over on the Oregon coast, and he would buy his tag and not go hunting during the season and go out New Year's Day while all the cops were sleeping after chasing people all night and go poach an elk. And figured he'd haul it home and butcher it out while nobody was looking. But he said once he'd find them, if he bumped them, he could just follow their trail because they'd break so much brush going through. He could literally hike them down because they'd run a mile, half mile, and settle down figuring they were safe, and he could walk up on them and get his shot.
Huh.
Don't know how much truth there was to it, because he liked to tell stories too. But anyhow, uh, his stories about hunting Rosies.
I could see that. I mean, definitely, you're going to have travel corridors through that type of vegetation pretty hard. It's going to be pretty easy to, find those major corridors and trailways through there. But I've talked to a lot of people with hunting Roosevelts, and they said, man, it's so hard. It's frustrating sometimes because you've got this animal sometimes 30 yards from you, and you're bugling back and forth, and you can't even see a hair on them. And it's like, oh, no thanks. So,
Yeah, I've watched some of the videos on YouTube about hunting the Roosevelt elk in that fern forest stuff. Oh, yeah, man, it's thick.
oh, some of that you get in those bottoms of those, that are open, those creek bottoms, and with some of that skunk brush and or whatever they call it, and it's it's some phenomenal looking country, but man, you can go from those ferns mossy to good Lord, you're crawling through a tunnel and there's spikes and needles that are ripping your flesh off, it feels like. So,
Yeah,
Everything's wet.
I was up the Oregon coast last year and looking at trees and stuff, and you look at that stuff and you're like, man, where I live, you can see through the trees. It's up there, it's like, wow, it's just nothing but trees.
yeah, it's crazy.
So thick. My God, I can imagine.
Yeah. And imagine 1,000-pound animal getting through there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a lot different on the coastal range too because you have a lot of forestry companies that own a lot of the property and they actually sell access tags and access permits to be able to hunt Roosevelt on their properties, on their pieces. And man, if it if fire danger even gets too high and there's forest fires, they will lock the gates and shut the whole entire forest down. And nobody goes hunting out there. I don't know why it's rainforest. It's not going to burn that much. I guess it can. So,
Yeah.
all right. So that is it, guys. So, appreciate all you tuning in tonight. I will actually send out the Google Doc. Has everybody been getting that okay? The access to the Google Docs? Has anybody tried?
I think I saw the email. I have not attempted.
Okay. Well, I'll just keep throwing it out there. You guys have access to it, and if you want it, and also I'll let you guys know when I upload the recording to this. So, and everybody knows now that compliments of Greg that in 2 weeks we'll be talking about wallows. We'll be talking about wet wallows, dry wallows, the purpose of them, what they're for, why they use them, all that good information.
How many different types of wallows are there? 6?
No, just 2.
2 of them are extinct.
A dry wallow, and a wet wallow. And each one has different purposes. So,
Yeah.
okay.
So you've already made it interesting. Yeah.
All right, guys. As always, keep calling, keep practicing. More importantly, though, have fun, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks on the next episode of Wapiti Wednesday Live Q&A. Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night.